Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon what part of the world you're in. And we are coming up on the 4th of July and Canada Day. So we are going to have a pretty comfortable, laid back conversation today entitled We the People. Because that's the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. It's actually signed on the 2nd, and we celebrated on the 4th, but it's actually signed on the 2nd for the Declaration of Independence. And what I thought about with We the People was to have a bit of a conversation around what that actually looks like in America. Because we're a pretty big place, and so is Canada. So, We the People, it's kind of interesting in the concept of who are the people, right? So, I'm from Baltimore, I'm from the DC metro area. So, I'm used to a very transient type of people. I think, Phil, you're from the Missouri area.
hmm
ML, he's from what, Vancouver, right? Area? And where are you? Fly is also here in Texas with me, but where are you from originally, Fly?
Texas.
You're from Texas originally?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing to consider the different types of people. Because, like, in Texas here, and especially in the political climate that we're in, when you see somebody who says, "Oh, where are you from?" "Oh, California." Like, there's almost an immediate, like, "Oh no, you're a liberal" experience. And it's funny as these people say, "Oh, no, 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 we escaped." Like, they're not wanting to be associated with the people from California when they live in Texas. Now, that could be because Texas is a very, very conservative place, other than like two cities. Um, but I think it's kind of interesting that each place, in when I was growing up, with rap music, right? East Coast versus West Coast had two totally different flavors of music. If you look at the food we eat based on the part of the country that we live in, I think there's some really interesting nuances to what it means to be the people, right? To be an American, to be a Canadian. Because Canadians very much are very similar to us, although they appear to be farther down the progressive slippery slope than we are currently. Ours is more pocketed to certain areas, whereas I think their country is more governed progressively. Whereas the U.S., you have the split governance by each individual state based on the people that live there. So you get places like Texas that exist, and Tennessee, and Florida, and Georgia that are all very, very conservative. You got the Bible Belt in the middle. So there's definitely a nuance in how people behave geographically. So I'm going to start this week with Phil. So give me a 10,000 foot view of what the people are in your state.
Very simply put, Midwest, at least northern Midwest, I can at least refer to. Um, when you step on somebody's foot, the person you stepped on will say, "I'm sorry," because they had their foot in the way. Um, which is kind of like Midwest, and then you go up to Minnesota, it gets even funnier. Um, and like that whole hold my beer mentality. Um,
What do you mean, hold my beer?
typically, well, it's like I'm gonna go do this, hold my beer. I'm gonna go try it.
It means I'm about
Uh,
to do something stupid.
Yeah,
Record this.
it's like hop on the four wheel or hold my beer while I make this jump or as I go through this.
Drove the
There,
riding mower shit faced, and now I've
yeah,
got a corn maze.
yeah, yeah. But there's also the other side, which is the out in the farm fields bucking hay. Picking up 120-pound bales and throwing them on a tractor, on a trailer, and then taking it back to a barn and loading it up in the barn. And then there are those people. Then there are the blue collars. And then there are like the bottom rung of that, which I think every state has those. Um, but typically, like I would say, the mass majority of people are good people on their way to do good things. Um, so hopefully that summarizes at least from a local standpoint.
All right, Chris, Emma.
What kind of people are around here? I don't know. Super diverse. Like it's
But
it's
what
like
is what is the culture in Vancouver like?
very left.
Oh,
Very
give
left and annoying.
articulate that more, please.
Like, in what way?
What is so? What? Okay, when you go out to go
I
get,
hate it, and I'm trying to leave it. So, I mean, I'm not the person to ask for a positive representation of this city.
okay, then spit out what it
Vancouver's
is.
dying. I'm trying to leave. What is it? It's a bunch of people dying of fentanyl, and the rest of us pretending that we don't notice. That's what Vancouver is right now. It's a hole.
Really?
It's like asking somebody what
How
they
big
think
is
of San
Vancouver?
Francisco who's trying to leave San Francisco and then being shocked when they give you a negative answer. What are you, naive?
So is Vancouver kind of like our San Francisco is now?
It's been called the San Francisco of the North since when that was a positive comparison. I visited San Francisco 15 years ago, and I thought, wow, San Francisco's like a better version of Vancouver. Now, San Francisco is, from what I've seen, it's
Just
like
as bad.
well, yeah, it's like Vancouver. So, like, yeah, don't ask me for positive representations of Vancouver. I don't like this city. I'm trying to leave it.
Where would
I mean,
you go if you had a choice?
Anywhere else? Like, to the interior? That's what people who are doing with sanity. You make your money in the city and then you leave it. No sane person stays in the city unless you're like some insane extrovert. And I mean really insane. Like, you really need to have constant company. Like Ric Flair sort of thing. Where you cannot just, like, you can't be alone. You know what I mean? The people who cannot be alone, from what I've seen, stay in the city voluntarily. Everyone else gets the money and then leaves. That's Vancouver.
What about you, Fly? Where are you from in Texas? Texas is the size of a country, so
From Dallas, Texas.
you're born and raised here. So
So Texas is a red state, and me being a what I call a POC, a person of color, man, I have ups and down um, feelings about why I live. So you know, I do know that. Understand my dilemma, my conundrum, because I am a black man, right?
you're
I'm not
breaking
trying
up
to
there,
use
Fly.
race, but race does play a part. Race does play a part in everything. Still true in America today. Texas is the last state that freed the slaves. Um, like, for instance, where I work at, I run the optical. I run the whole optical Key Whitman and Plano. And we deal with a lot of baby boomers, I should say. And they stuck in their ways. They're stuck in their ways. And they don't loosen up to me until they get my card and look at it. Oh, you have an MBA. And, you know, it's a trip because my name tag is
That's the whole. You're so well spoken.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. So
And
my
like,
name tag says David MBA, comma ABOC. Now ABOC means American Board Optician. I'm a board certified optician. So sometimes they see my name tag, they might say, "What country are you from?" I say, "Excuse me, your last name M. Fucking God." No, I said I have an MBA. Oh, then they loosen up. Oh, what college? Concordia University of Texas. Oh, it's a Lutheran college. Yes. Oh, it's a great college. Yes. See, okay, yeah, he's smart. He's the smart one. What do you think about President Biden? They want to go political. I don't like none of them. They all think to me. I don't want to go down that road with me, but still, as a POC, a person of color, man, we still dealing with a lot of shit. There was never ever it was just swept underneath the rug. So for
so
the most part, we came a long way, and to be honest, we still have a long way to go as a people coming together as people. Fuck the race as people. So that's why.
well, so I'm gonna kind of jump off of that for a second because it brought up an interesting part of the we the people. We have an interesting propensity as a people, regardless of where you're from, to want to hold on to our injustices,
Yeah.
like they're badges of honor. I was a Jew. All of my people were persecuted. I'm an Indian. All of our lands were stolen. I'm black. We were slaves. oh, I'm white, we're discriminated against. Oh, I'm woman, I don't have a right to do anything, and I'm held back, or I'm a person of color. There seems to be every part of our society
Yeah,
100% wants to
that is
jump
right.
on some kind of fucking sacrifice that someone made before them that has nothing to do with them. Like, there's not a white
Exactly.
person alive today who's owned a slave. There's no one alive today in the United States that was born in slavery. There's no slaves except in
That's a
Africa.
fact.
There's
That's
no slaves
not
today. You're talking. The
true.
last slave was freed
Still
over a
slavery.
hundred years ago.
That's
And hey,
categorically
dude,
untrue.
July the 7th, when it was written, what was I? What was my people? When we the people was written into law, what was
Oh
I?
yeah. Oh, you were
I was
three
a
quarters.
freaking
No,
slave.
but you
It
I
was
was a
two.
slave.
Was it two
just to
thirds or
just to
one
pause it
third?
for a second. You cannot say that
Hold on.
slavery doesn't exist in the United States today. That's
Not
categorically false.
okay.
You
So
can say that it's not that it's illegal. Of course, it's illegal. But you
okay. So
cannot say that it doesn't exist. Millions of those children crossing the border, the southern
okay. So hold
border,
on a minute. Let's.
are immediately
I
being put into children's slave factories where they're chained
okay.
to
So
beds.
hold on a
There's
minute.
been a bunch of reporting on that.
Hold on a minute. That's not what I'm
Slavery is
talking
alive
about.
and well.
No, 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 no. That's
Are you
illegal.
talking about
I
institutional
am
slavery?
talking about when
Systematically legal slavery?
I am talking about when in this country it was 100% legal to own another human being.
Okay, so you're talking about the legality of it.
Correct.
Because slavery
Now,
still exists.
you just like crime still exists, although it's against the law.
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
that's a delusion to say that, and you guys all jump down onto the fucking delusion. Then on the idea that I would actually think of saying that is kind of funny to me.
Well, no, but you
But
need to
no,
make it
hold-
distinct because to say that
I
slavery
said-
doesn't exist just as a statement is
But
wrong.
I
It
said
needs
nobody was born into slavery today. That is
proof.
a
No,
lie.
that's incorrect too. No, that's incorrect too.
Okay,
Same
so
thing.
when was
Illegal
when was slavery?
immigrants-
No, when did slavery end in the United States?
I don't know the official history of it. It's illegal if that's the
Hold
point.
on, let's
That's not
see.
the point,
What
though.
date in the United States was the last?
Okay, so while you look that up, because it doesn't matter. So again, I've watched a whole bunch of reporting on this. Again, this is all being allowed by the Democrats. The wave of illegal immigrants, the millions of illegal immigrants crossing
Okay.
the southern border,
June
usually
19th.
being run by cartels.
June 19th.
They're being sold immediately. They're paying via slavery for their transit in a lot of cases. So you have pregnant mothers crossing the border and then giving birth to children. And the mothers are in slavery and the children are absolutely in slavery.
Okay,
Like,
so
it is happening. On the Democrats, on Biden's watch, to be
so
clear.
June 19th, 1865, hence the beginning of Juneteenth, was the day that the last 250,000 enslaved black people in the state were free by executive decree. So, 1865, prior to June 19th, if you can show me an individual that's still alive that was born before June 19th, 1865, then you can say they were born into slavery in the United fucking States. That doesn't mean that people who were brought here. But at the end of the day,
What?
1965,
No, that still
we
that has
had
nothing to do
we
with
had
what I was
race.
talking about.
But you guys aren't hearing what I am saying. You
We're
guys are talking
the
about
legality
something
of it. We already said
opposite.
that. You're talking about the legality of it.
And my point is, and why I want to talk about the legality, not the application of slavery in the United States, because
No, not
slavery is
its
still
existence.
existence, because I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that there hasn't been anyone born into slavery in the United States as a citizen of the United States. So every citizen in the United States, all 100%, all 300 million are actually free humans. Period. This is a truism. That doesn't mean that there's not people in jail. That doesn't mean that there aren't people immigrated into this country that are enslaved by evil people. I am
Children locked up in
Oh my
evil
God.
parents' basements being sexually abused.
Okay, so
I mean,
again,
this stuff happens. We just don't like to talk about it, but it happens.
but that's not the point. We're talking about the society of the group, and we've gotten so far on a tangent, it's not funny. But the reality of it is, what I'm discussing or attempting to discuss is how we think it's okay or a good idea as a society to jump onto this injustice bandwagon to say, oh, we're all oppressed in some form, and we're constantly trying to outdo each other with our level of suffrage. And how, as a people that wanted to leave that, when we founded this country, to leave oppression, to be a free group, want to voluntarily put ourselves back in subjugation through a proxy emotions. Oh, I can't get.
13th Amendment, Brian. If you break the 13th Amendment, you are back in slavery legally through the penitentiary system. Read the 13th Amendment.
I mean, I actually wanted to have a bit of a discussion around the idea of are we more or less free today than we were 100 years ago? Because I am of the belief that we're less free than we were 100 years ago. Because 100 years ago, you didn't need to have to ask permission to do everything. 100 years ago, it wasn't illegal for you to collect rainwater. It wasn't illegal for you to not be a part of the electric system. It wasn't illegal for you to live on your land without having water from the state or without having electric from the state. You know, there are so many things in our society that take away our actual freedom that we accept carte blanche. So, anyhow, I'll get off my tirade there. Phil?
Running in circles.
Yeah, apparently.
I mean, we could all talk about the depravities of we the people, or people in general, which I think is what we're really starting to talk about, which is like in my hometown there are drug addicts everywhere. There are people shooting up heroin and taking crack or smoking crack. It's everywhere. It's an infestation. It travels from South America all the way up. It goes up 61, which is near St. Louis. It's 55, then 70, then 61. Takes 61 all the way up till Iowa, hits Iowa. Then it moves right over to Chicago. It's this shit train of drugs, and it's called the Mule Run for a reason. Does society deem that like these drugs are banned? For the record, all of these drugs are banned, but people still take them, still use them. Just because slavery has been banned doesn't mean there are not types of slavery out there. And the same could be said in sex trafficking. There are ways that these children are born in and they stay in, and they haven't left for 20, 30 years, and there are very few that actually get out. So these things actually do happen, but slavery in and of itself has been banned for a very long time. It's the same thing as like discrimination in companies, right? You see at the bottom of every application, or when you go talk to a company, they're like, well, we're a equal opportunity employer, blah, 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 right? That spew. Well, that spews there because there was legally divided back when that they couldn't discriminate on people by their race, gender, ethnicity, any of that. But does that mean that there aren't racist people in that company, or that there are sexist people in that company? The answer is, well, yes, people are people. There's always going to be bad people. The question is, do you look at the bad and try and fix the bad and right the inequalities there? Or do you look at the good and say, well, we do have good and we do have bad. Let's do what we can to fix the good, or to fix the bad and right and improve the good. That's just like a choice of conversation.
You know, Chris was typing in the discussion something interesting that I think is worthy of expounding upon as we look at We the People, because he had highlighted the Amish. Amish are an interesting group of people. They're phenomenal craftsmen. They sit outside of our normative social system. Like, none of them have the internet. They're not on Twitter. Um, and I saw an interesting thing about they were talking about COVID-19. I know we're not allowed to talk about COVID, but the Amish had a 90% less death rate than the rest of the world. They didn't get vaccinated. They didn't do anything. They didn't change anything.
They just nobody, because they have no interaction with the outside world in the first place. So they have like an all or nothing strategy where it's like, well, if it gets in here, it's probably going to kill us all, but it's probably not going to get in here because how is it going to get in here? They're going to airdrop it? Like, no one comes in here.
So I thought that was very interesting. It's like, okay, here's a group that really, really is conservative. They have conserved their culture 100%, right? They haven't. When did they stop? Like the 1800s. So they haven't moved forward very much. But have they moved forward? I think they have. I think they've evolved as a people, as a group, but they did it without compromising their core values. And I think that's a commendable thing, right? Then the question kind of goes to, all right, so obviously our society would never revert back to their way of living, right? But there's a really good argument for their way of living. Like, they don't have half of the autism. Like, I saw a thing on Twitter. Again, I don't know holding any stock at the moment. The guy was like, okay, can you show me someone with autism who doesn't have a vaccine? And apparently there's no singular case of somebody with autism without being vaccinated, which I find it interesting because I don't know where they would come up with that data. I don't know how that data set was calculated, but
I don't know how you could possibly
I know.
confirm that because there's no database of spectrum people.
Right, that's why I'm like, okay, how could you even... That seemed like a pretty far-fetched claim,
Yeah.
But I haven't seen any community notes on it yet, so I'm not necessarily... It was,
what that person... Now, here's they could test it. What that person needs to do is they need to draw attention to their claim in order to test it. So what they should do, quite simply, is they should just say, they just need to put money behind it and say $1 million to somebody who can show to me that they have been diagnosed by the appropriate medical professional as having autism spectrum disorder, and they can show me their
vaccine
whatever
records.
The receipt, exactly, whatever the receipt is to show that they've been vaccinated. You show me those two things, here's $1 million. If the person puts that up and that stays up there for years, gets publicity for years, and no one claims the $1 million, it doesn't prove it, but it suggests it very strongly because $1 million is a very high incentive.
Yeah.
As somebody who's had vaccines and is probably somewhere on the autistic spectrum, if I cared enough to get diagnosed, you could do it for a tenth that much, $100,000. I hear about that. I hear $10,000. I'll just go get diagnosed on the spectrum and collect my money. So, I would say to that person, it's a legitimate, they're implying causation, but first they have to prove even that there's a correlation. So to prove the correlation, I would just offer up the money.
Yeah, no, there's a interesting thing within the United States and within a lot of the countries around the world where you have different cultures. Like, we've been invaded. I mean, there's no better way of describing over 2 million people coming across the border in just set into the interior. Now, the fortunate thing about the Latin invasion of our country is, for the most part, these people try to assimilate within a certain amount of time because life's too hard not to here. But there is large swaths of areas that they can function speaking their native tongue. But if you look at what's going on in France, you had a couple million Muslims dropped into their country that are not assimilating at all and categorically have a different belief system than the French.
And weren't provided, to be fair, and because it's also true, we're we're just airdropped in. They weren't provided with civics classes.
No.
There was no attempt to help them bridge
the disparity.
the gap between what like the culture they're coming from and the world they're used to and the experience they're used to and the one they're going into, which is like almost it's quite different. It's quite different, and to just airdrop them in with no attempt to just to in any way help them understand. Okay, so here you've got to treat women a little bit differently than you did at home, for example. Nothing like that. No, because they just assume, they just hide behind these stupid mantras, these bumper stickers. And the one they hide behind the most is diversity is our strength, as though the mere act of having diversity increases like social cohesion and the strength of your society. The mere act of it. Prove it. Like, that doesn't logically follow to me. From what I've seen, all of the Scandinavian countries, the leftist socialist democracies that the left in America likes to point to as exemplars, well, all of them are ethnically and culturally homogenous, or they were until they introduced a small element that wasn't. But the reason those countries have ran so well, okay, one thing that's worth noting in all of these countries that are run so well that the leftists like to compare and say America should emulate and should somehow like upscale their version to from 7 million people to 330 plus. Like, that's just so easy. But one of the things they always fail to mention is, oh, by the way, all the like, not only are those countries much smaller, which helps, everyone's closer together. All the people look the same. They all speak the same language. They all come from the same culture, background, church, etc. They all look the same. Do you think that helps them get along a bit?
Get out of here.
Get out of exactly. Yeah. Whoa. In group, out group preference. Like,
So-
again, just all of a sudden they're ignoring really basic psychology, like right down to the level of biological psychology with like in-group, out-group preference in animals. Like, or just animals that, like storks, that see the smallest and weird looking of their young and pitch it out of the nest. Like, this in-group, out-group, like, to pretend that that isn't in us, not to say that it has some validity, but to say that, to pretend that it isn't there at all is just nonsense. And that's basically what they did. They're just like, no, we're just going to put these people that are programmed from birth to act in ways that are actually antithetical to our culture and our principles. And we're just going to assume that they're going to override the way that they've always been.
No.
Instantly upon hitting the street, just by some magical adaptability. Like, are you? Yeah, like, people say, "Oh, hindsight's 20/20," as though foresight doesn't exist. It's like, yeah, hindsight is 20/20, but you could have seen this coming 20/20 with foresight. All of the elements were there for you to make a pretty low resolution, because no higher resolution is needed, a low resolution iron shut case for you should not be releasing people with antithetical values and principles into your society without trying to help them in some way adjust.
Or even
because
consider
otherwise you are setting them up for failure.
And-
And this is the most sympathetic frame that you can take, where you're not demonizing the immigrants. This is the take that this is why I like this take, is because it appeals to leftists. This is the take that isn't demonizing them. This is the take, which is why I think it's the strongest, where it's like, what were you thinking? You're so sympathetic to these people. Okay, they come in from a culture where it's okay to, for example, exclude women in cafes, where it's like, this is a men's only cafe, you can't come in here. And now you're airdropping those people into Sweden, where they're going to be able to set up their own spaces and exclude women from cafes, and you think they're not going to do that.
We're just
Based on
speaking
what?
years from excluding black people from going in white-only restaurants and businesses. Come on now, in America.
Oh, I saw
Well,
this.
they think that's what, like, the gay,
I mean, redlining.
like, not,
Are you
Ho-
gonna
not
red
gaying cake thing
No,
was,
red-
but that wasn't about that.
No. Actually, I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry, Fly. There was a thing because the Supreme Court upheld the right to not build a website for a gay couple because it was against their religion, right? To not have to force them. This guy put a sign up on his buildings. The Supreme Court says that we can discriminate against our customers. Trump supporters aren't welcome. And then it says if the church is not support a pride flag, you're not welcome either. And the response was great that somebody tweeted on it. He was like, that's awesome. 7% of the population are LGBTQ. And yeah, good luck with keeping your business open for a long time when you just alienated 97% of the populace. Good job, genius. And that's the thing. A free market will make that correction for that business. Anheuser-Busch discovered this with Bud Light. You know, the left talks about
And other businesses keep discovering it,
Target.
like Target.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
Oh yeah, yes.
So here's the
The
interesting
token
thing.
strangers in fiction.
Here's the funny thing about this, and I don't think it's white people, black people,
Target's
or brown
like,
people.
hey, it looked really fun tripping over that coffee table. I'm gonna do it. Oh shit, it hurt. Who could have seen that coming?
So
It's like something out of a comedy skit.
yeah, it's almost like it's like hilarious to watch happen a second time and a third
Well,
time.
it's that thing where it's like, what was that headline I saw in the Babylon Bee, where it was like dystopian fiction writers are complaining that reality is continually outdoing them. Like
Yeah.
they can't keep up with reality anymore. And I think it's the same thing for comedy writers. It's just like you write comedy scenes about like bumbling White House or whatever, and then whatever the current White House is comes out and does something that's
Better.
even more bumbling than the thing you made the skit about, and you're just like, oh man, we thought we were overselling the joke. We were underselling it. Reality just keeps dunking on us.
Oh,
It's-
you
yeah,
want?
Clown World.
I saw a thing, and I hope to God this was a parody. But apparently, the Biden administration was to block out the sun for climate change. Yeah.
That's true.
Oh,
What?
No, okay, that was like the most dramatic way of phrasing some proposed project about some kind of solar screen that could like diminish incoming sunlight by like 1% or something.
Blocking the sun.
Well, you know, there's a reason no person's taking that seriously, because the logic doesn't hold up.
No.
The basic logic is, hey, human beings have been messing around too much with the natural order of things. So in order to correct this, we're going to erect a giant sunscreen to screen the entire planet itself. Does that sound like we're moving in the right direction?
So
We've been interfering too much. So in order to correct it, we're going to interfere more than we ever have before.
so
Oh, good logic.
again, so I want to kind of bring us back into a minute because we've kind of gone into
Okay,
a lot
we'll
of
go back to heart. Heart. H-A-A-P. H-A-A-R-P. Heart.
what?
Oh yeah, HARP's an interesting one where that's where actual science and conspiracy theories come together, and because of course it's like this huge classified, it's like Area 51 level.
DARPA.
There's a lot of room, and yeah, DARPA's another one. There's a lot of room in there for some interesting theories. Yeah, like bouncing things off the ionosphere, and I've read a bunch of things about HARP.
So interesting thing was I saw an Australian guy. He was talking about climate change. He goes, follow the science. He goes, Australia puts out like 473 million metric tons of carbon a year. And he goes, the average sized tree will consume X amount of carbon dioxide a year. And then he did the number of average trees in Australia was larger than the number of carbon dioxide pollutant. And he said in Australia they're going to be cutting down trees to put up solar to help with carbon dioxide. And he's like, I'm following the science. And apparently nature already solved this problem for us with the plants. And he mentions another plant that was like 50 times more effective at consuming carbon dioxide. He's like, this is what I don't understand. He's like, I'm following the science, and if we keep the trees, we're okay. Stop cutting down the trees, and we'll be fine. Which I'm sitting here going, oh my God, that is so hilariously common sense, or so simple. Why?
There's a lasting conversation around polluting or pollutants in general. And there's been conversations with India as well as other countries that are quote unquote behind the US, whatever that means, that have been told, well, you're still in that age of burning coal. You should continue to burn coal, etc. And we should have the ability to do so because we didn't get the up that you guys had, i.e., the U.S. had during 40s, right?
That's what China said. That's what China
Right.
still says to
But
this
then you've
day.
got
Yep.
the Saudi Arabia, which is a massive push for ecologically green resources, buildings, infrastructure. Yet they're burning 40 million tires every month in the desert. They just light them on fire and burn them. But then how does that work? The pollutant there is so high. I mean, it's in, I don't know how many countries burning tires is illegal, yet they're allowed to burn how many tires per month or per year? About that.
Oh
Just
yeah, we
there's so
don't.
many idiocracies. Just no.
People aren't concerned enough with contradictions. I
No.
think is a point I would put on that. Like I have discussions with people where they'll say things that break my head and make me just really frustrated and upset because I can't get them to understand it. And then when they finally understand it, they're like, "Oh, I wasn't. No, I was just saying things that were like I wasn't saying things that were brain breaking and upsetting. I was just saying things that were contradictory." Actually, I had a guy say that to me in Discord about a week ago, and that broke my head again because I was like, "What do you mean you were just being contradictory? Do
Why?
you not under?" And then it was just like, "Oh, okay. You have a different relationship to contradiction than I do." And it was just the first time I realized that that was even possible. I guess in my narcissism, I was walking around assuming that everyone didn't like the feeling of being exposed as being self-contradictory. But there's lots of people who get exposed as it, admit it, seem totally self-aware, like they're really admitting it, they're not being coy or being sarcastic, and they're like, no biggie. I'm like, no, it kind of is.
It's like people who will offend, or they will insult you and go. We used to joke in the car business. You can say anything you want if you start the sentence with, "I don't mean an offense, but." I don't mean any offense, but.
Yeah, no offense, but you know that what's coming after that caveat is going to be deeply offensive. I mean, yeah, it's a joke.
I swear to you, I have been able to say
No
absolutely some of the
disrespect, man,
most.
but your wife's a hoe. Like it's always that, and it's just like, why did you tack no disrespect? Like that's gonna change how I feel about what you said afterwards. Fuck you.
But
He's really disrespecting you. He's just trying to
Chris,
save face.
You're just trying to hedge your bets like a coward. Just say your disrespectful thing to my face like a man, and
anytime you put
instead
butt
of trying to back away from it as you say it.
Anytime you put butt in the middle of a sentence, that just fucks off everything you just said before. So,
butt negates everything said before
really
it.
I mean this half apology that I'm starting with.
But I kid you not, I have watched it in actual freaking application. I've been a closer for years in the car business. I've TO'd thousands of people. And like when people are just out of their mind on what they're offering, they're just like nuts. And I'm like, okay, I don't mean any offense, but what are you smoking? Like, what are you on? What drugs are you taking that you think that this vehicle should sell for this, right? It's like, are you high? Did you fall, bump your head on the way in? And you can literally say it, and they'll go, oh no, it's just that. Well, no, you're an idiot. You're stupid. You've done research. You already know what invoice is. This shit's published online. It isn't like it's some mystery anymore. And they still come in off you $5,000 on the sticker. Oh, what are you gonna give me for it? For my car. Oh, you mean the thing that doesn't have a straight fender on it, has no front brakes, shakes like a tree when you try and hit the brakes? It starts up, it has 3 check engine lights on, and it smells like a dog died in here? But oh yeah, it should get good, extremely high value. And your car should be under invoice. Oh, you should pay retail for that car. It's in good shape. It's reliable. They sell you on reliable, and buy mine on condition. Like, that's, if you want to talk about contradiction, the absolute blindness that people have with their own things and children in relationship to what they expect of others is amazing. You know, and it goes back to, when we were talking earlier, right? We the people, right? And we said in the beginning, we the people, we all have different cultures, we're different ideologies. Negotiating with people from different cultures is an amazing eye opener on how people negotiate. Arab people,
Oh, I know. I
black
know.
people, Indian
Oh,
people,
yeah,
white people, they all negotiate massively different.
I
Intellectuals,
agree.
engineers, like, you want to see some interesting discrepancies in the human condition. Watch how people negotiate. That is a very interesting preposition. I don't know if you've had that experience, Chris. Have you ever
Arabs
negotiated with?
understand that Arabs understand the power of no, and they do it well, which I find
I
quite interesting.
love the power of no. Something, just as a quick aside,
Sure.
I mean, on the power of no. So I had an amazing experience at one of my previous jobs with a guy who I always called the Marlboro Man. He was a former boxer, great salesman. Guy was like 53, had amazing hair, square jaw, huge hands, like and just still had like big build, no gut, hot wife, just super successful, had the voice, the whole bit, and he just as classically masculine as he could get, and I had a rare opportunity to one up him in a masculine way when this a lady named Fabiola, who had a body and a face and a presence and dressed in a way that went with that name. She was just, chef's kiss to, everything that the best plastic surgery and yoga could make a woman look like, a true Vancouver woman, and useless as tits on a bull in terms of her actual job. And so as a supervisor, so one of her favorite things to do was to try and offload her escalation and supervisor duties onto subordinates. And she tried to do that with me one day. I guess it was just my turn, but I wasn't even on her team. I was just known as somebody who was really good with escalations. And she tried to offload one on me one day, and I didn't even look at her. I just said, yeah, no, my plate's full. I'm busy. No thanks. And I was quite gruff and dismissive with her, even though she's a rank above me. And she got kind of miffed and just went off. And Don, the Marlboro Man, had been watching this interaction, and he comes over with his coffee cup and his, dad knows best sort of attitude. And he says, "Oh, Chris, you have a thing or two to learn about women." And of course, everything in that statement tells me how he's perceived what just happened. And I looked up to him and I said, "Oh, Don, if you've never refused a beautiful woman in your life, you should try it sometime." And he looked at me. He was like, deer in headlights. He was not expecting me to come back with anything like that. And he had and he was processing it because he just watched me do it. All of a sudden, I watched him replay what he just saw, only with that, knowing that that's how I felt. I didn't feel like I made a mistake. I did exactly what I wanted to do, which was to tell her, no, wiggle your butt out of here. You're not pulling that scam with me. Do your own work. I'm going to be the one man in this tower that tells that woman no. And
there's power in no. You go to a
huge. The respect. Like, Don respected me so much more after that. Everyone did. The respect. Because everyone else toadied and simpered and fawned for her merest smile. Even though everyone knew that she's engaged to some millionaire guy with a six-pack. Like, she's not going to let anyone touch her here. Like, there's nothing to be gained. but they would all still do it anyways. Just, oh, she's hot, dude. And it's no. The power of no. Just say you have nothing to gain from that anyways. Don't sacrifice your dignity for nothing. No. Walk away.
Jordan Peterson. One of the things I saw somebody do with Jordan Peterson, and he said he's a guy who's a debate coach of some kind at a college. He was analyzing how Jordan does interviews, and he's like, one thing Jordan does better than anyone he's ever seen in debate is use the word no. When people attempt to rephrase his position to be not his position, his first word
Which
is
everyone does with it.
yep, which is no, I didn't say that. No, I don't believe that. No,
I do that too.
and the thing
Start
that
with no,
no.
I didn't say that.
And
That's the strongest thing you can start with is just to say no, I didn't say that. Because unless they quoted you verbatim,
No.
you can say that.
And I found that to be a very interesting observation, and then I started looking for it, right? When I went back and watched some of the stuff. And I realized that he does actually do that. And it occurred to me that that is such a brilliant thing to do. So I copied it. Now, I have debates and discussions all the time in my shop with my clients. And they'll say, we was talking to a guy about gun control yesterday, right? And he goes, we got to ban assault weapons. I said, no, define an assault weapon. He goes, well, anything. No. Specifically. Like, if you let people make generalizations, you can't negotiate a discussion with them. You can't have a general conversation because there's no specificity in order to actually ferret out complex ideas. Like, me and Chris were talking the other day that if we could figure out what the difference between in 1950 when my mom and dad were in 50s and 60s when my dad and mom were in high school, there were shotguns and rifles in every truck in the parking lot because the kids would go hunting on the way home, and nobody took a gun into school versus now. And Chris pointed out to me, he goes, if you can simplify a problem that bloody complex into one neat little box, you don't understand the real problem. You're not giving it the credence it's really due.
Oh, and I even said, like, I'm just paraphrasing Peterson, who's said it before, like it just in terms of people are very quick to look for univariate, meaning one cause, solutions to incredibly complex problems involving like populations.
Oh yeah, like the gender pay gap.
And exactly, gender pay gap is usually the thing that he brings it up for because people say, oh, it's due to sexism. And it's like, okay, well, sexism is going to be one of the causes in there, but
and it's a small
one.
It's
going to be one, and I would say it's a pretty small one because it's illegal.
Yeah.
And it's going to be one of many. And there's going to be many that are much larger, and of course the largest is personal choice.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of hard to demonize when you put it that way.
But I think one of the things that we do as a people, right, and when we founded this country and our independence, was we all wanted to have a voice, but we realized that if everybody had a voice, it would be utter chaos. That we needed representation at a local level,
That's why you're not a democracy.
That's right. And we needed it at a local level, a state level, and a federal level, right? And I think that our language as a people is being changed in a manner that wasn't intended. Like our forefathers were smart enough to recognize that they had to make a document that had movement ability and the ability to add to it, the ability to make it more effective based on the times. But at no point did they ever envision a democracy. Like at no point did they want mob rule. At no point did they want...
They openly wrote
Yeah.
about, and actually, the Greeks themselves, the inventors of democracy, at the time, many Greek philosophers wrote about mob rule,
As a
about
problem.
that being as an obvious problem. Um,
We can all vote to kill you.
of democracy. So basically, it's a huge argument. Mob rule, is it a feature or a flaw of democracy? That argument has been going on since the very day democracy was invented by the Greeks. And it hasn't really been, like, the founding fathers' way of solving that problem was to not go with democracy.
Constitutional republic. So,
Correct.
and again, I think that constitutional republic is proven at this point the best concept in history by a considerable margin, as there are evidence that this is the case. Um, but I think one of the things that we did today in our discussion is we started and we've kind of bounced around a lot of different things that all have to do with being citizens, all have to do with being people that are a part of a larger group of people. And I think there's a national identity in the U.S. that if you take our current polarization out, if you take the 5 issues that we argue about: abortion, guns, rich and poor, education, and work. Those are the 5 main things that we fight about as a society, right? Who gets the jobs, who has the money, who has guns, you know, who you can murder. That's because at the end of the day, you know, somebody, if two people or two beating hearts go into an abortion clinic and one comes out, I'm gonna say somebody died. So there's that's an argument amongst the people. And like one of the things with the Supreme Court, and this is the part that I love about our government and about our country, is that they simply said, let the state decide. Let the people that live in an area decide that particular topic. The Second Amendment will never go away because it's just we're founded on it, and it's an impossibility. And I think that's where we find ourselves as a society, is that you have a generation that's being taught to hate our country, that America's bad, that America was founded by racism, that if you're a non-white, that you're disadvantaged, and that if you're black or if you're brown, that white people don't want you to succeed. You know, I live in Texas where it's a pretty diverse population. There are a lot of white people, but there's a lot of fucking people of color here in Texas. And I deal with them every day. They come into my shop. They're the nicest people. 99% of them, no matter whether they're Arab, Indian, Mexican, Chinese, Thai, white, black, they all come in with a problem. They all want help. They all don't want to pay too much. They all have, when we sit down and talk, they all have jobs. They all love their kids. They all want to have the best life they can have. None of them come in to me and go, oh, Jesus Christ, there's a fucking white guy here. Okay? When a black guy walks in, I don't go, oh, dude, here, let's run a credit check. I don't make the assumption that they can't buy something. And if they're driving a crappy car, I don't assume that they're poor. I had a guy who literally...
That gets interesting, though, at the airport.
I mean, everyone's not like you, though, Brian. I mean, everyone is not like you.
But
dude.
most people...
That kind of screening,
If
though,
that was
that
the
gets
case, you would not-
interesting at the airport. That's all I'm going to say. Like, you check how they screen in Israel.
Oh!
They have the best airport screening in the world.
Yeah.
But their airport screening uses tactics and techniques that here would be condemned, probably unconstitutional. They'd definitely be challenged. And they are, by definition, explicitly what would you call? Well, they're based on stereotypes. They're based on race. Like they pull aside the guys that look like to them, that look like non-Jews, not like anyone that just looked has a physical anything that says to them in any way, you look like you're not an Israeli, not a Jew. You're probably going to get pulled aside. And if you look like a Jew to them, you're probably not. They're not wasting time with the people that they have
You're not
assessed
taking an
already.
80-year-old grandmom to shake her
Well,
down.
yeah, Sam Harris does a whole bit about that, about how we need to be careful with our condemnations of discrimination because there are many types of discrimination that are performed that are quite legitimate. For example, if you want the best brain surgeon, then you're going to need to discriminate against all the brain surgeons that aren't the best. And you're going to need to test them to find out which is the best. And all the ones that aren't are going to feel discriminated against because they're going to get told that you're not getting it. But nobody, like when a life is on the line and you want the best brain surgeon, that's clearly what we do, and no one has a problem with it. So, same thing with airport screening. Sam Harris was talking about how when we pull aside an 85-year-old grandmother who's using an able walker, we're wasting time. Like there's 0.0% chance that she's a threat, and we're doing it simply to satisfy our own moral intuitions that feel aggrieved by the idea of looking for people that share characteristics with the people that, like, from an area that are trying to do us harm. Now we have the luxury here of not, like, 9/11's happened, there was that thing with the shoe bomber, but aside from that, there was these kind of incidents in Israel have been pretty ubiquitous since its founding. So they haven't had the luxury of being able to cluck their tongues and go,
They're not
oh,
being they're
that
not cavalier.
seems a bit racist.
Well,
Oh,
they can't be cavalier.
It's not cavalier. It's more like it's a sensitivity. Because cavalier is just kind of like they couldn't be bothered. It's more like they don't have the luxury of sensitivity. They can't worry about whether or not they're offending some good Arab people that live in Israel, that have nothing to do with the PLO, that love Jews, that have Jew friends. They are those Arabs that look Arab to the Israeli security forces are going to be inconvenienced at the airport, and that's how it is. And it's funny because all the leftists here who get all up in arms about anti-Semitism, then you bring up stuff like that, and all of a sudden the room goes quiet, and it's like, well, yeah, so exactly, because what are you going to do? Are you going to go to Israel, and are you going to argue with those people about their security protocols? And are you going to try and tell them to make them less rigorous and less effective because you wouldn't want to appear to be prejudiced or something?
So
you're like, they're going to look at you like I'm looking at the camera, like, so you want people to die,
yeah,
so that your sensitivities aren't offended.
dude,
That's insane. That's morally nuts.
So can you explain to me, this lady was being assaulted by a person of color. It was a black guy. It was a homeless guy. And when the police arrested him for hurting people, she was crying that she didn't want him arrested. I didn't want him to go to jail. I just didn't want him to stab anymore. I'm like, what? Like, you're speaking and no one's hearing you, Chris.
Oh, sorry. I was like, lady, what do you think happens to people who are going around stabbing? They go to jail no matter what they look like.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, I didn't want him to go to jail. I'm like,
because you know why? To her credit, or to her defense, maybe she's just worried about being the next Karen who has her life ruined because she called the cops on a black guy. But in this case, it was legitimate, and the fact that he was black had nothing to do with it. It was all the stabbing. But we're so unsophisticated now. People are so quick to they would just see, some Media Matters or whatever accumulating some bullshit stat is just going to put that in the column of Karen calls cop on black guy. even though it was a totally legit call, and the fact that he was black had nothing to do with it.
It was
They'll
the
still lump it
activity.
in there. Or like when they lump suicide by gun, where it's not murder-suicide, it's just somebody blowing their head off with a shotgun. They lump that into gun death statistics.
Yeah.
And it's like, get the fuck out of
Okay, so where I'm from, remember, so Brooklyn, Maryland, it's literally like 2 miles, 3 miles from where I grew up, right? 20 people were shot last night in a mass shooting, like 2 or 3 died. And this will be off the news in less than 3 days. And nobody's up in arms about it.
Because in 3 days, there's going to be another one somewhere.
Oh, yeah. And it's Baltimore. Let's go. Oh, yeah, well, it's Baltimore.
And we're used to it. It's like that. It's uncanny
Now,
how prescient that
make
speech
it-
from the Joker was like. It's expected to happen. We're used to it. A shooting in Chicago, you don't say. A shooting over the weekend in Baltimore, you don't say. That's every
But if it
weekend.
happens
We
in a
just get used
school,
to it.
if it happens in
Yeah.
a school,
Exactly.
then that's the narrative.
Or if a mayor
that's
dies,
then it's across, every platform, and we
or
got
if
to
it
take
happens
guns
in the
away.
Capitol, if 2 people die, how many people died in the Capitol riots? Was it like 2 or 3?
It
If
was,
2 or 3 people die in a riot at the Capitol, it's an insurrection. But if 2 or 3 people die at a riot in Portland, it's a protest.
yeah, it's mostly peaceful.
Really?
Mostly peaceful.
This clown world, come on.
Yep. So as a people, right? How do we take this back? Like that's not a question that I'm expecting the 4 of us to answer, right? Because I don't know that answer would even come close to touching the surface of the problem. But we as a people have to start talking about what's acceptable and what's not, as if that is something we didn't do in the past. And I don't know how we go about that, other than, like we continue to do, is have a discussion around things that we observe in the world and try to unpack them in a manner that leaves room for people to think at the end. And I think something that we try to do on this discourse or this discussion, and today was kind of, I guess you could call it a chaotic discussion as we went, oh God, every possible direction. But the underlying theme is all of it is people. I think people as a group are terrible. There's a lot of evidence of it. The individual has redemption. And I think until we start realizing that the individual is where it has to begin, that you can't govern
Everyone
people.
seems to be agreeing with that.
Yeah.
I mean, ancient philosophies and wisdom traditions and religions across
Starts with the individual.
time and across the globe have all put this big primacy and focus on the behavior of the individual. Yeah. It starts with your head and hands, and you work outward from there. I mean, it's not rocket science at all, but I mean that really is kind of the struggle of humanity in progress. Really is that, like, each generation has to kind of relearn everything that has been learned by the previous and those before, and things get forgotten and then rediscovered and relearned again.
A
And
transference of data. When I started the podcast,
it's not, it's not clean. We have the internet now, which gives us an amazing, it's the best notepad and pencil we've
come up
developed
with,
yet,
yeah.
but there's still that process of transferring all that data into our heads, and
Retaining it.
yeah, it takes time. And I've been having a nice I've just been thinking something out about just, to me, the whole thing was about just the ability to
Govern.
self-governance.
Yeah, I was reading that along, and it's really good, and that's one of the things that what I'm going to have you do, if you don't mind, Chris, is kind of summarize what you wrote, and then I'm going to.
Well, and I've also recorded this whole thing, and I've recorded
Right.
it in a way that shows all that as well. But yeah, well, you know what? I'll just save the text document and send it to you.
Okay, that's fine. Um,
Yeah.
but Fly,
Yes. Yes.
my friend, you know I got nothing but love for you. And
That's me.
something that I will think would help most people is that what you look for, you find. If you're
It's
looking
true.
for racism in the world, that's all you're going to see. If you want to look for the negative in the world, that's all you're going to find. I think the challenge we have as a society is to take off the glasses of suffering, take off the glasses of oppression, and start putting on the glasses of I'm free, putting on the glasses of I'm not going to allow you to subjugate me. Put on the idea that as an individual, you get to choose the lens you look through the world with. And I'm stealing this 100% from Sean Eichhorn, who wrote a series of books called The Happiness Advantage. And he was like, if you scan the world for the negative, you program your mind to do so, and the news does it every day, right? They always present the bad. But if you reverse what you look for in the world, you'll reverse your experience of the world. So we got to start normalizing looking for the positive experiences you have and not the negative. Sharing the positive experiences. Hey man, I went into Breaks Plus and I met this guy Brian. This motherfucker was the most solid white guy I've ever met. So much so that I do a podcast with him. Nobody talks about that experience. They want to talk about the time they went into McDonald's and somebody uh, didn't do something that, or they perceived something that someone did as a negative connotation, and then they want to live on that negative connotation. We got to stop that, and I don't know where that started in our society. That the best thing to do is look for the negative because that's what you can be outraged about. And I know it's that whole cancel culture is like it's literally a fucking disease in my estimation. And I'm
Oh yeah.
not
Okay.
and I'm not saying that we should walk around with fucking rose-colored glasses on, okay? I'm a realist. But on the same token, if you wake your day up and you start your day looking for how you've been disserviced or what injustice happened to you today, your life is just gonna fucking suck. If you wake up your day with, man, I'm gonna have a great day. So I had a heart attack in 21. Every day I wake up and I'm not dead and I'm not having a heart attack and my wife is sitting next to me and I get to see that beautiful face, I'm going to have a good day. Why? Because I'm not going to permit somebody else to fuck it up. Because you know what? Each day I'm the author of my life. Like, I have put together a philosophy that I tell to young people that I'm going to end our podcast on because I think it's really good. And it kind of goes like this: you got to consider yourself a story character, a storybook character, right? You're the author of this character's book. The first 20 years of your life is the prologue, and that's written by your parents. Everything that you believe is because they told you first, okay? So that prologue of your book is not the book that you're an author of. About 20, you really kind of begin to write your own story in the context that you start to challenge the ideas of what you were told growing up. But the reality of it is, you have a white piece of paper every morning when you start your day, and you get to write your day. You're the author of your life. Every every day's a page. Every month is a book. Every year, every month is a chapter. Every year is a book. Every decade is a volume. If you live to be 100, you get 8 volumes of your life. And you have to prepare for yourself in those volumes in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s. And each decade forges you through suffering, through pain, through banging, through beating, into the person you're going to be for the next 10 years. And that person's suffering and that person's experience forges you for the next more difficult set of years. Like your 20s is littered with your own stupid decisions, and most stupid decisions hurt. I mean, Chris, Phil, Fly, can you name easily one decision you made in your 20s that was really stupid and really painful? Like all of us can, right?
I'm
Chris?
making them right now.
Half of them I can't even
Oh,
remember because I was too black and
hey,
drunk.
me too, man. Me too.
Like all of us spent our 20s, and Phil's in his 20s, doing galactically stupid shit that really sucked that we had to recover from. Okay?
You know the type of work I do as a licensed optician. I made that decision in my 20s, so that's probably one of the best
Right?
decisions I ever
But
made.
that was probably from a bunch of bad
But I have made a
decisions.
lot of egregious decisions.
Right? So, my point of that is that we have to start looking at our lives not from what's happening to us, but what we're making happen. And not viewing today as, oh, what tragedy is going to beset my life today. More like, okay, I have a clean sheet of paper to write the best life today that I could possibly live. And the better we are at recognizing we control that as an individual, the happier our lives will be by a magnitude of a
I
lot.
agree. And here's the flip side, Brian. That the book can be re-edited. You can
Yeah.
go back and re-edit what you wrote.
And don't write a dumb page over. Like, if you had a shit day, you wrote that page, don't write it again. You're talking to nobody, Chris. Sorry, buddy.
I was talking to myself.
Oh,
There was a study done that I want to cite real quick. Very interesting study. It was done by the APS or APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association. They did a study on specifically it was both mixed male and female, and they got them into a prosthetics lab, and they put scars on them, visible scars, and during that process, they had to witness that they had a scar on their face, X, Y, and Z. They lined out interviews, like job interviews, and they would assign it based upon what that person wanted for a job. They went into before they went into the interview, they asked the people who were in the group, the controlled group, saying, would you like us to cover said scars? 100% of the women said yes, we want to cover the scars. It's like 61% of the men said yes, we want to cover the scars. The people who went into those conversations, all of them went into the, like, let's just say, all right, fine. All of them went into the interviews. When they got out of the interview, they sat down with the board, and basically they were asked a series of questions about how they feel about the interview. Was it positive or negative? And it was like I don't remember the exact percentage, but there was a high percentage of the people who said let's cover the scars came out of the interview saying the interview was negative. And there was 100% of the people who went into the interview that had the scars visible that said the interview went just fine. It was like okay or great. The question that was asked to the people who said, well, it was generally negative, they asked why was it negative, and they said they kept making statements that pointed to the scar on my face, right? Or they kept making statements that made me feel insecure about said X, Y, and Z. And the run for the whole idea was that people, even though it was covered, let's say it wasn't even on their face, it was on a different part of their body, they felt somebody was talking about that because they had it, and they knew they had it. But the people who were doing the interview had no idea at all. And so it was the perception that you perceive that other people, like, okay, I don't like X, Y, and Z about my body, right?
everybody else
And
is
so
going to see it.
right, everybody has this. And so then I'm going to expect everybody else to know exactly what is wrong with me, what I don't like.
And they're not going to like it either.
Right, but the understanding is that you've seen it because that's the way you perceive it. That's the way you're perceiving them asking that question.
There's a built-in narcissism there too. People really forget that other human beings A, exist, and B, are different than them, and see and perceive things differently. People
And
just
also
forget it in the moment.
And also understand that we're human. There's a lot of people that are that way. And if you ever bring that up in a conversation, like if you have a zit on your nose when you were 16, right?
Oh, the North Star.
Yeah, there were some times just professionally I had some zits in some really bad places and very visible, and I'm just like, hey, I'm 17, okay, just give me a break, right? And everybody just laughed because what are you what are you gonna do, right? There's nothing I can do about it. So we're all human.
Yeah, I think there's a truth to that, and it leads in with a lot of what I was saying, that we tend to project our insecurity on what other people are saying as to create our own victimness, our own victimhood. Oh, they didn't like me because I'm white. They didn't like me because I'm black. They didn't like me because I have a nose ring or an earring or my hair or I'm bald or they want to find a reason that lets their personal accountability off the hook.
But it doesn't negate the fact that there are
And there are some,
people. Yeah,
yeah,
there
that does happen,
definitely are.
right? But
Oh yeah.
it's not in the prevalence that they think it is. Like I see this in the younger generation. They come in and they're like, oh, I can't get a job. I apply all the time. And it's like, okay. I had a guy come in and apply for a job and he shows up in t-shirts, shorts. He goes, are you guys hiring? I'm like, dude, you look like a bum. What world do you think you're going to come in my business and work here? You're not even serious about applying. You're coming in as a compunctuary thing. You're doing it because you have to, because it's the only way you get your welfare check or whatever unemployment check is you have to apply a certain number of places, right? So I still, I'm of the belief that we the people is about the individual. We the people is not a group. We the people is a collection of individual liberties. Because if you look at the Constitution, they are specific to the individual. They highlight the individual's rights. And like I saw somebody say this on a tweet, it was great. The people are private, the government is public. We should know everything about the government, not the other way around. The government shouldn't be private. The government should be public. We, the citizenry, who the government serves, are the ones who are free, not the government. And I thought that was such an interesting take. So,
Democracy's been abused to such a degree, but I want to say this because it kind of sums up we the people. It is like a foundational principle of democracy and self-governance upon which the United States was established. It symbolizes the collective responsibility and participation of the citizens in shaping their government and the course of their nation.
fair enough. Fly, last words? Fly, you got an ending thought? Fly. He's not
Signal
hearing me.
to us that you are still alive.
Are you there, Fly? He might be stepped away for a moment. So, ML, last thought?
Says teleporter. Yeah,
I'm
to me,
back
it's the problem. Oh, are you back?
There, he's back.
Yeah, but
Yeah, go on.
oh, well, when you think about government, especially here in Ireland, we live in one of the greatest countries in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and every country, every government have blood on its hands. But we supposedly live in a democracy, but it's becoming more socialism every day. To me, it's my opinion. It's socialism disguised as democracy. It's still a good country, but it still has a long way to go. We the people, we need to come together as people,
Yeah.
and like you said earlier, Brian, there's no color. People should be colorblind, but we as human beings, we are gonna have our small prejudice, a small dislike, but we can come together collectively as people against the people who are pitting us against each other, and we know who those people are. Then we the people have the total meaning what it's supposed to mean. in the beginning anyway, man. That's how I feel about that.
Chris?
Government means to control, to govern your mental. So yeah, I get it.
And Chris, I see what you're writing. Is that your thoughts there? You're muted.
Yeah, this whole time I've just been struggling with the concept of um, what, like, at what point do the rights of self-determination kick in, and like how large a mass of people is required for a revolution to to be and to make sense. You know, at the level of a nation state, how does the United States deal with something like, say, the Branch Davidians, where they have their own little insular society and they don't want to be part of the United States anymore, and they just want to be their own thing. And the United States has this commitment to respecting self-determination and individual freedom, but there's an obvious collision point there with the interests of the state to maintain a stable and consistent,
Populous.
experience for the populace. So if you have a nation that allows each incorporated town or whatever to declare itself its own little mini sub-state within the nation state, that they have their own laws, their own whatever, then you're just going to have mass chaos because each is going to be different than the other, and you're going to have to familiarize yourself. Like, to drive 100 miles, you're going to have to familiarize yourself with like 100 different sets of rules of law, and it very quickly descends into just chaos and incoherence. So there's an obvious tension there that I don't think has an easy solution. I think it's going to be a consistent negotiation, which isn't a satisfying answer, but that makes me more convinced that it's probably accurate, because a lot of the answers to these sorts of things that are accurate are not satisfying. So, um, yeah, I don't have a lot more to say about it than that. It's a really complicated subject for me. Just the semantics of like what constitutes the people is
Yeah, that could be
something.
a 2 hour conversation.
Well, that's literal. That's all I've been writing about this whole time, really, is what constitutes the people. If one person plants a flag on his lawn and says, I'm leaving the United States, I've become my own country with my own set of laws, I'm invoking the right to self-determination and self-governance, we don't take that person seriously. But the question at a philosophical level and at a logical level is, why don't we take that person seriously? And when you really consider that question, the answers actually aren't reassuring or easy. I've been trying to unpack them. It's really, the answer for why we don't take that person seriously is because in order to maintain social cohesion and consistency, we have to ignore that person. But nothing about that invalidates the person's claims. So it's not satisfying. We're not saying to the person, no, you're wrong for thinking that you have the right to do that because of X, Y, and Z. We're saying to the person, we're not going to allow you to do that
Yeah.
because doing so would be practically inefficient for us, which is that's not a logical refutation. That's not a philosophical refutation. That's essentially might makes right. That's essentially saying that would, maybe you've proved the point logically, but recognizing it would be inconvenient for us, so we're just not going to recognize it because we have the luxury of that, because you can't make us
Yep.
recognize
It's
it.
that 3% rule. 3% of the
really,
population.
that's why I kind of wrote at the end that like the size of the people required to invoke the right to self-determination will always be a negotiation of force between the people, however large they are, and the rest of the people. It's always going to be a negotiation. I don't think there's like looking for a constant, like looking for the constant of gravity, like looking for a number that we can say this is
You
it.
need 524. There's no
Exactly.
number.
You need exactly 524 people. I think that number is
That's
always going to be a product of an equation.
well.
So you're never going to be able to
It's
have
going
a
to be a
static
percentage.
number.
It's going to be a percentage.
Yeah, and you don't even know what the percentage is. So it's always going to be a
3.
number that is derived from an equation. You're always going to have to run the equation with the numbers of that context. So in other words, case by case basis. Not a satisfying answer. We'd like an answer that allows us to make a blanket universal rule, but as far as we can
Not
tell
happening.
for this, yeah, not happening. There's way too many variables, and the variables change minute by minute, hour by hour.
Because we're
case by
people.
case. Because we're, yeah, exactly.
And we're
what's
the individual.
because what's involved is a system of human free will,
Yeah.
consciousness, not a system of physical stuff, of rocks banging into each other. This is far more complicated than that. This isn't trying to predict the
We have free
orbit
will.
of predicting the orbits of the star, predicting the movements of celestial bodies at distances impossible to comprehend is far, far easier than predicting what people are going to do either as individuals or as mass groups. And that's just because we are far more complicated than stars.
We the people.
Stars are just helium and hydrogen exploding. They're incredibly simple. They're just incredibly powerful. In terms of sophistication, any human being, we are the most sophisticated structure that we are aware of extant in the universe. I think by any reasonable definition of the word sophistication.
And
in terms of, like, how difficult was it for the universe to produce us? There's stars fucking everywhere. How many of us is there? So far, we've only found one planet in the entire goddamn universe that has anything resembling the structures that our bodies are comprised of. Black holes are everywhere. They're not that complicated. Neither are stars. We're way more sophisticated and complicated than any star or black hole. And that's something I think people often mistake scale, power, and size for sophistication.
Yeah.
They're not the same thing. Like, stars are incredibly large, powerful, and vast, but they're not complicated.
Yeah. So
anyways,
that leaves us to, and I like how Chris kind of put that, the people are the people, right? And the thing about it is,
we like, the reason that we are we deserve to be the focus because we are the most complicated thing in the bloody universe.
and
That's true. I agree.
And we the people are all individuals, and we all have our own will. We all have our own governance systems, and we the people, we're flawed, and I think we're flawed individually, and I think we're flawed as a group because there's no overarching control power that requires everyone's concordance, right? That used to be religion, and for 2,000 years, religion has been that concordance. Depending upon the religion, it doesn't matter which religion it is, right? Whether it's Judaism, Christianity, Muslim, Islam, whatever, right? There was always a tie, right? But now we the people have become extraordinarily focused on we the individual, and the individual's feeling about experience has come to trump the group experience, because we are seeing that as evidence of the smallest group of people are imposing restrictions on the largest group of people. So I just think it's interesting.
Power has always been in the people, man.
Huh?
The power has always been in the people.
That's right. And I think that's the
people are the power. Like,
That's
when we
right.
talk about the government,
they don't have any power.
the government doesn't exist as a corporeal thing that we can touch
It's people.
and measure. It's an idea. It's a shared idea in the heads of a bunch of people.
Yeah. So, with that, we the people are going to be signing off, and next week, I think we're going to start on to a different topic, although this was an interesting one. And have a wonderful 4th of July for those of you here in the States, and those of you in Canada. Have a great Canada Day. We'll see you next time.